Hello and welcome to Deep Art Talk. I'm Madil Hardis and we're back after a long break, but we're back with something really, really good. We'll be talking to an outstanding musician tonight that I personally had the privilege of working with a few times. And of course, I'm talking about Anders Hagström from Ashbury Heights, and I'm going to bring him on right now. Hello. How are you today?
I'm okay, thanks. That's a very haunting intro.
Well, I'm trying. Yeah, how are you? What's the weather like here? It's so hot all day, all week. It's been like a heat wave, and we're suffering in London.
It's the same here. You can see that I'm very well lit. I actually have like really thick curtains closed in front of me. It's if I'd open them, it would be like that movie Sunshine. It's just it's very warm. It's very sunny.
So I have a whole bunch of questions for you. But before we begin, obviously most people watching this, they absolutely know who you are, of course, they do. But for anyone out there who might have stumbled into this interview, can you give us a brief introduction of who you are and what Ashbury Heights is all about?
Oh dear, I wasn't prepared for that.
A one-liner will suffice.
Yeah.
You want to tell us about yourself? Maybe, things that often you get introduced in exactly the same way because people copy paste. So if there's any way of introducing yourself.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I'm Anders Hagström. Everyone calls me CJ though, because my middle name is Carl Johan, and Anders is a really cool name in German, but it's in Swedish. It's pretty much the most common name you can have. It's like being named John. Mm-hmm. And I've been doing Ashbury Heights since 2005, and I presume that I predict that I'm going to keep on doing it for some time.
Well, I really, really hope so. I've been following you from the very beginning, I think, and fell in love with the first songs, and I keep falling in love with the new songs. Not just the ones that I am part of, but
well, the ones you are part of are very, 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 very good.
Well, now you've set this interview up in the right way. Obviously, we could talk a lot about the band's biography and milestones, of which there are many. I just summed up just on Spotify, the top 5 tracks alone had over 8 million streams. So that'll tell you how popular this music is. It's it's got a sort of intensity to it that is really addictive, I think. But what I really am interested in talking about is not so much, biography and history of the band, but more your artistic process. So instead of asking you, how did you start out as a musician and all of that, what I'm interested in is, when was the first time that you can remember that you felt a sort of creative spark? So what is the first memory that you have of you doing something creative and feeling like this is something?
Oh, I actually started out wanting to be a comic book artist. Really? And I started out drawing, and I was really into that. Did that for many, many years, and I started out like when I was 3 years old. I started drawing things, and I was actually quite good at it. I was like, if I look back at like the drawing books that I had, like sketchbooks I had when I was 13, 14, I look at them today, I'm like, wow, I actually had talent. But I have I have hypermobility, which means that my bones don't fit together all that well. They're kind of loose, which means holding a pen eventually started giving me intense pains. and I can't really hold a pen for more than a few minutes before it gets painful. So I stopped drawing, and I think it was like sometime like early teens that a friend showed me a guitar and showed me how to play a power chord. And the power chord just exploded me into a new universe of possibilities, because there's an infinite amount of creative choices that are available to you when you have a guitar and you have the knowledge of the power chord. So I almost immediately started writing my own songs, and I played the guitar literally until my fingers bled. There used to be like blood splatter all over my pick guard on my old Fender, so when it came time to pick a college, I picked the music one, which surprised myself, because there was one for like graphic artists in my town, and all my friends were going there. I remember looking through the like available educations, and I was like, suddenly just music felt more right, and I was surprised myself, like, then is this really what I want to do? Like, but this feels more interesting now. And it's all thanks to the power chord.
I think you had a good hunch there. But that's very interesting. Do you feel so how do you perceive and feel music? Because obviously starting out as a visual artist, do you feel like that sort of talent or way of looking at the world bleeds into your music?
Yeah, I'm really like I studied music for quite some time, but musical theory never really took. Like, I learned how to read notes and I learned a lot of musical theory, but I've never really used it. I've always been very much a feeling musician. I do something that feels right, and I don't really care that much about whether it's theoretically sound, which sometimes really annoys our guitar player in Ashbury Heights, Johan, because he's very, very aware of all kinds of rules and stuff, and he can be like, this chord doesn't work. You're doing this note in this like B sharp chord, and you can't do that. It's wrong. Or you're following this up with this, and that's just, it's weird. It's weird. I'm not going to be able to remember this. You're breaking all the rules. And I don't know. It's I've always thought music, like, yeah, maybe it's kind of like painting. Maybe for me, making music is kind of like drawing. It's just, if the picture looks right to me, then it's the picture that I want. So I don't sweat the, like, whether I'm jumping wildly between jazz chords and minor chords or something like that. I don't sweat that much.
So you don't approach creating a song from a sort of intellectual point of view initially, but rather intuitively, you'd say?
Yeah, definitely.
So what's your process like? So let's say, you set out to write a new album, create new songs. Are you the type of person that waits for inspiration to strike, or do you actively seek it out?
Ooh, so back when because I used to do Ashbury Heights full time. I used to be a musician as a full-time job for several years, and back then I would feel the need to force myself through writer's blocks. And that would usually take the form of me like sitting in the studio listening to stuff on Spotify just randomly and trying different things with different synthesizers and just waiting for my brain to shake loose. That's not always successful. Sometimes it is, but these days, like, what I find is that if I just wait for it to come, it usually ends up better. Like, and a lot of the times when I would force solutions, even now, sometimes there's a deadline and you actually have to force a solution. And a lot of times when I try to force a solution and I put it there, it might be like a few days before deadline while I'm working on mixing it, I suddenly get a better idea while I'm mixing it. And I'm like, okay, I need to scrap all this and start over again, because this will be so much better. And then of course,
totally get that. Yeah, because when I work is the same. I can't intellectually plan every step out and say, okay, this is how it's going to be, because it changes while you're working at it. And I can really connect to that. So
no, there's been these situations like our upcoming single, a song called Is That Your Uniform? It started out as one song, and while working on it, I kind of wrote a different song in my head. So while actually recording and working on that song, it was like, oh no, I have a better song in my head on the same theme, and with some of these chords, but this would be much better. So in the end I ended up scrapping it completely and starting over from scratch. But it was like the first song kind of became the stepping stone of the new song, and the new song is much better. So it's
so there's a bit of a creative chaos in the beginning, and then something will evolve and you'll just follow basically your intuition. When inspiration strikes, so what kind of things do inspire you? Is it because a lot of people say, okay, it'll be experiences in your own life, or it could be a dream or whatever. Do you have specific sources where you feel like that's often where ideas come from?
It's different depending on whether you talk about lyrics or music. Okay. Because when it comes to lyrics, I'm very much inspired by like things around me, personal life, dreams. Sure, absolutely. I've had those moments where I wake up and I've had a dream, and that like leads to me writing a line on a piece of paper, and then that line just spirals out into a song. But when it comes to music, it's almost entirely from being inspired by the work of other people. I always say, I've never been very good at listening to music, like listening to other people's music, because if I hear something I like, it makes me really inspired and makes me want to go write my own music. So usually I hear like the first one or two songs of a new album, and then it's like, oh, I can't listen to this anymore. I have ideas now. So it's I'm kind of fueled by other people's work.
Yeah, that's great. So and lyrics. So what do you usually start with, or does it change depending on what you're working on? Does it usually start with lyrics, or does it usually start with music, or can it be either way?
It can be either way. Like sometimes there's a really good lyrical idea that just has to be put into a song. And sometimes there's a song. Sometimes a song can be around. Songs can be around. Like song ideas can be around for like ages until I come up with a good lyrical concept that fits into my idea of what that should be. So it depends.
I think that if I remember correctly, that was how it was with Wild Eyes. That you said you had the instrumental or the music much longer before.
Yeah, but that's also like Wild Eyes is also a case of that other thing where like one song kind of led to a new song, because the original arrangement was really very different. I mean, you remember this. The original arrangement is quite different from the one we ended up releasing as a single, and the single arrangement is a much more accessible song. And but also, the lyrics were really hard. They were deep. they were like lodged deep inside some corner somewhere, because it took literally took years before I came up with something that worked. So I don't
they're outstanding. I like when I saw it for the first time, when I heard, you were singing on the track, when I heard it for the first time, it was a revelation. I think there's something really deep there, and it's perfect for that song. So I guess sometimes you just have to wait until you get where you need to go emotionally, or in your life, until you retrieve that sort of information.
Yeah, thank you. It's nice of you to say. But yeah, no, it's it really worked out well in the end, and it's also like it's fast becoming a live favorite. It's everyone seems to be enjoying that one.
Great. I want to go back a little bit to the creative process. So for me anyway, I feel like over a decade of working, I figured out what I need, like how do I need to be set up, what sort of daytime works for me, what sort of state do I have to be in, what do I need in my surroundings for my creativity to work best. So how do you work now, and has that changed over the years? Did you in the past encounter any obstacles that were difficult to overcome? And so what's your setup? What do you need in order to work well?
Ooh, that's well, I'm very much a night person when it comes to creative stuff, which of course is really bad when you also have a day job. So I don't get to do that much anymore. But I really like working through the night with music. My ideal schedule for like being creative is usually somewhere around like from 10 p.m. to 6 or 7 in the morning. That's preferable. And when it comes to lyrics, I like going outside and writing them like somewhere, like writing somewhere else. Like I like sitting at a plaza or like at a bar or something, like going out where people are and like trying to channel a feeling. Usually it's I find it easier to write interesting lyrics when I'm like out of my own element, so to speak. It's harder to write interesting lyrics when I'm like sitting in my kitchen.
I totally get that. I think sometimes a little bit of background noise and a little bit of things going on can be really, really helpful to just to just have this underlying current of things.
Yeah.
And then some things will just come to mind.
Yeah. And also writing, like I also tend to write lyrics like when I'm out performing, like at live shows and stuff like that. So in those kind of environments, like after a show, sitting backstage, I can get inspired. That can be that can shake something loose. But yeah, it depends. And of course, it's also, when it comes to lyrics, it's really important for me to try new things. I did a lot of like perhaps try some of those old writer's tricks, like trying to be slightly sleep deprived when you write. Can sometimes create some really weird chains of words. There's some of our songs have that, like where I was really tired and really needed to sleep, and writing lyrics in that state caused a lot of odd chains of words, and also doing the cut up thing. What's his name? Naked Lunch guy, Burroughs.
So do you feel like you're actively seeking out moments where you're not fully fresh and fully alert, so you get into a more intuitive space rather than being too head driven?
Yeah. I mean, because when you're fatigued, or when you're like in an environment that's not your natural environment, or like when you're doing something that you haven't done before, or like putting yourself in a place or a mood that isn't like consistent with your everyday life, that tends to create new new ideas, and you can come up with. I find I come up with like more interesting sentences that way. I mean, I might still write songs about basically the same experiences that I would have written if I had just been sitting at home. But maybe I find different perspectives on it. Maybe I look at it in a different way because I'm looking at it from a position where I haven't been before.
What are the sort of themes that you're interested in when writing lyrics, or even when you look at your music and just try to figure out what is it that this is about? Because obviously music is always descriptive of something, even if it's not necessarily something it could be something abstract, but it's still descriptive usually. So what are the sort of themes that interest you? Do you think it's always something more realistic coming from your life, or is it also something fictional?
I think we've always like described Ashbury Heights as a kind of place where we can be accepting of each other's mistakes and work through them together. I think one of the reasons that Ashbury Heights has resonated with a lot of people over the years is that our songs are often about failure and bad times, but set like cast in a hopeful light. Our lyrics are very often about the bad times, but they're also I try to make them inviting, and we usually it's like, I had a bad time. Do you recognize this? If you do, you can share that bad time with me, and maybe you'll feel less bad about having it. And if enough of us do that, maybe we'll like feel better together. It's and that's not planned. That's not the way it started out, because Ashbury Heights started out very much as the typical future pop, grim dark, like edgy, like dark synth kind of thing, because that's what was popular at the time, and we were quite young. But it like over the years, like I think on our second album, there was a lot of crap happening in all of our lives, and I started trying to write lyrics that were actually true to what I felt. And then that kind of kept going, and in time it's kind of become this trademark that we try to look like embarrassing things and things that are cringe and things that are really sad or really terrible, and we try to look those personal failures like straight in the eye, and we try to like share them in a way that makes them feel less terrible to acknowledge, maybe.
I guess that's a sort of cathartic experience as well. And
yeah,
so you would say that second album was a bit of a turning point?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's also very like, it's very looking at the lyrics now, it's a lot of them are really naive, because I was not used to writing that kind of lyrics, and I was trying to discover how to actually write about things that mattered to me personally, instead of doing these like highly conceptual lyrics about things that weren't really like, it's looking back at the first album today, it's like a lot of it, some of the concepts are like, I'm surprised sometimes, like, okay, this is actually kind of clever. I was being clever writing this, but it's not, it's more about like, it's more philosophical and much less heartfelt.
I think both can have, its place, and I'm sure that listeners that have been with you from the beginning will probably, some of those early songs will be the ones that have brought them in, and there's some amazing songs there. So I guess it both has its place, but probably for you, the more authentic it feels, the more you connect with that in a way, or it feels more like you.
Yeah, I mean, there are songs on the first album which are like, they're personal because they're like inspired by personal events, even though they're not exactly inspired by personal experiences. Like Derek is a Strange Machine is probably my favorite track on that album, and that one is very personal, but it's not really, it's not something that happened to me. And then there's songs on the first album which I'm kind of embarrassed about, which we which we try to avoid talking about, because again, I mean, we were young, and some things, like some proprieties, weren't really, communicated to us that well at that point.
I think, as an artist, you just do whatever feels right in the moment. And obviously, if you would go back knowing everything you know now, having lived everything you lived up till now, you would start at a different place. But
I mean, I'm happy to have been able to have been. I mean, I was never really allowed, like, I was still. I mean, when I started Ashbury Heights, I was still. Jasmine was really young. She was 17. I was 25. And I never really got to be really young and really angry and really loud. So
you can still do that.
yeah, it's kind of different now. So I'm kind of glad on the one hand that we never did that, but on the other hand, it's kind of disappointing that we never did get to do that, be like super young and raw and just like angry or something. But like, we started out like really high concept and probably trying to be more adult than we really were, because most of the bands that we were looking up to were 10-20 years older than we were.
What were some of the bands that inspired you at that time?
Well, Covenant, Depeche Mode, of course. A lot of like obscure future pop and like dark electronic acts. I remember like loving some. I had like. I had albums by bands like Absurd Minds, Solitary Experiments, stuff like that. And we were just really, really into like the whole future pop thing. And we couldn't really do it. Like, I don't think our first album is not a good example of future pop, because it's way too raw and like edgy, and the sounds are really like harsh, and it's a very punky take on future pop, if it's future pop. And like one album later, we completely stopped even trying. So it was a short phase, but I think without that, like without bands like VNV Nation and Covenant, Ashbury Heights would probably never have started to begin with. So it was a start.
Yeah, and a great one at that. So I have a few more questions, but if someone who's listening right now has a question about anything relating to creative processes or in general about Ashbury Heights, then feel free to post it, and we might ask you something unexpected. My next question would be, because a lot of people that are artists themselves watch these interviews as well. So if you could go back to that time of creating the first album and give yourself one piece of advice, looking at creativity and creating things, is there anything that you wish you would have known back then that you've learned over the last decade?
That's a hard one, because obviously, I mean, it's kind of a logical fallacy. If I would be able to do that, I would make myself disappear.
Yeah, you would not end up in the same place.
Yeah, exactly.
But, is there any advice that you would give to a young musician, let's say, out
to
there?
a young musician?
Yeah. When they're
Um,
starting out, and nowadays it's obviously much easier to put something out there, so the
it's
threshold is
yeah.
lower.
Yeah, it is. I often I often have debates with some other of my like peers in the same age as me or older than me, because we had very different experiences when we started out. Um, the world was very different. There was no streaming services. Though I started out when like the same year that Spotify started, so like I was, but it was very different. You made more money doing like a lot of things. It wasn't as expensive to tour. It was like stuff were in many ways easier. But I mean, it's easier to get your music out there today, but it's harder to get noticed today, because since it's so easy and it's so easy to make music today, it's harder to get noticed. But I really hate it when we old like the old guard tries to tell like younger musicians what to do. I think a big part of being a young musician is to tell the old people to shut the fuck up. So that's part of their whole raison d'être, and I wouldn't want to take that away from them. That's one of the pleasures of being a young artist, is to tell all the old artists that they're old. I love a lot of things that comes from young artists today. I'm incredibly impressed by a lot of young artists and musicians. And if someone wants my help, like with production or like tips on songwriting or lyric writing and stuff like that, I'm there for it. But I would never give anyone any advice unless I knew that they wanted it, because I don't think advice has any, like, unsolicited advice is a scourge. If I don't know what you are about, if I don't know what it is you're trying to accomplish, then there's no way for me to give you any kind of relevant advice anyway. So the one thing I would say is be true to yourself, do the stuff that you want to do, and do it the best you can. And I think that's going to turn out great.
That's very, very good advice. And this also means anyone out there who's listening who would like some personal advice, please feel free to comment or reach out. You're going to get bombarded with questions.
We answer all messages on our Facebook. It might take some time sometimes, because it can be slow, but we always answer.
And I think this is actually a really good point. What I found personally in this sort of industry, at least for the people that I've worked with and spoken to and reached out to, is that people are in general very helpful, even also with upcoming artists. And it's actually great to just ask for help, support, feedback. I mean, it can't hurt to ask. So
no, absolutely, it definitely doesn't hurt to ask, and it's usually just like it's usually fun to be asked.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, as you said, you can be much more specific about advice if you have a direct question. We have 2 questions in the chat. I'm gonna bring out the first one. So Nature of Wires is asking, where did the name Ashbury Heights come from?
Oh, well, it's not a big secret by now. So it's from Haight-Ashbury, the block in San Francisco, which was the center for the Summer of Love. The reason for that is that I watched this old documentary, like in the early 2000s. I watched the documentary on the Summer of Love and the music that it inspired. And showed these old documentary clips with like people playing in apartments, and all the musicians and all the talent that was gathered at that spot at that point. Like Janis Joplin was there, Jimi Hendrix was there, Grateful Dead was there. It was I mean, like I said earlier, Ashbury Heights is supposed to be a place where one can, where people can come together and find strength. And Hyde Ashbury was a place where a very important and powerful movement that was very important for music, among other things. It was a place where people found inspiration and found strength and found gathered the power to actually change things, and that's powerful. So that's kind of why.
That's a great sort of mantra for the project, I think.
Yeah, it's a reminder.
Great. We have another question. So this is Jonathan Dean. He's asking, hey, thanks so much for this discussion. Been a massive Ashbury Heights fan since 2008. Great. Can I ask, Anders, do you enjoy synth sound design, and how important is synth sound design to your creative process?
Oh, it's super important. I've actually done some sound design for video games too. I enjoy sound design massively. I don't have the time for it that much. I don't do it as much in later years because on the first album we had this rule that every single sound had to be actually tweaked by hand. So on the first album, every single sound is tweaked by hand using an analog synthesizer. But then on the second album, we started to move away from it a bit, started using more samples, partly because actually programming every single sound by hand was time consuming, and partly because it was fun playing with new toys. And these days, I'm kind of 50-50. I think I put a lot of effort into creating sounds that are prominent in a song, but I will not feel the slightest bit ashamed to reach for the sample pack when it comes to a backward cymbal or something small and simple, because it will not change the quality of my song if I do everything by myself, or if I steal a bass drum here and there.
Yeah. Would you say that sometimes you've started a song just by being inspired by one specific sound or one specific?
Oh yes. I especially love the Arturia V collection. I love mostly because I know all those analog old synthesizers by heart. And I can get I can sit down with one of those. I especially love that they made it possible to work with the CMI Fairlight, which is an amazing synthesizer that's horrible to work with, and no one can afford owning one anymore, and no one knows how they work anymore. But the Arturia CMI Fairlight has made it possible to actually dip into those sounds in a much more easy to use way, and I can sit and twiddle with that one for a few hours, and there might be a whole song that comes out of just twiddling on a good synthesizer. So absolutely, sound design is incredibly inspiring.
Great. We have another question. Let's have a look. Julian is asking, how did you get into remixing other artists' songs, and did you choose them specifically? And they're asking because all of your remixes manages to be better than the original. Well, that's a compliment right there.
Yeah, thank you very much for that compliment. I got into remixing because our label told us we should, actually. It was when we just released our first album, our label reached out to us and asked us to do a remix of a Rabia Sorda single. And it's good marketing, do that. And that was incredibly fun. And it also started a tradition of us doing remixes for bands in genres that aren't really our own. I think we've actually done more remixes for harsh bands like Rabia Sorda and Accessory and bands like that than we've actually done remixes for pop bands. I think one of the reasons I think one of the reasons that our remixes stand out quite often is that I work only from the vocals. I never listen to anything else when I do a remix. I download the vocals, I get the BPM, and then I just build the song entirely from the vocals. And I try to build my remixes like if I was the producer making this song for this artist, how would I produce it? And then it's always incredibly fun to listen to the original afterwards, because sometimes it's pretty close. Sometimes it's like, okay, I kind of guessed the genre. and sometimes it's completely, oh my god, I got this so wrong. One of the most egregious ones were when we did the Paradise City for Danny Blue. I'm really happy with that remix, but we did that remix like as this kind of Lady Gaga-esque shuffle tempo pop song, because that's what I heard, because Danny Blue's voice was so, this is the quintessential American bad boy pop star right here. I'm gonna make a glitzy pop track out of this. And then then it turned out that the song is this brooding, melancholy goth ballad in half the tempo. And I was convinced that I was at least right about the shuffle tempo. That was funny.
But it's an amazing approach, I think. It's and quite unusual, and it's great because it gets you into spaces. Otherwise, you would never get there, because the moment you hear the song, you're already biased. And then if you have all the tracks, all the stems of the song, it's very tempting to just go for something similar and trying just to tweak things a little bit. So that's quite an interesting approach. And you've done a few covers as well as a band. Like, not necessarily all of them are released, but some of them are on YouTube. Do you approach that in a similar way?
Oh yes, yeah, and that's actually why they're not released, because German copyright laws when it comes to releasing covers are quite strict, meaning that usually the songs, like the rules say, the rules basically say that you can release covers all you want as long as they sound exactly like the original. But yeah, we approach it just the same way with the covers. So like, for example, when we did a cover of People Are Strange by The Doors, that's exactly the same. First, I actually did a straight up cover that sounded kind of like the original, and then I just deleted all the instruments and started over again when the vocals were recorded. Right. So there's now the chords are different and everything's different and the arrangement is different, and that's our most successful cover, but it's also a cover that we'll never be able to release.
No, I get that, but I think it's really great to see what else, like what other musical potential can be hidden in a song if you strip things away and build it from scratch.
Absolutely. I'm a very big proponent of that, even in my own songs. Like if I can sometimes, there's a lot of songs that we released where I've made it almost to the end, and it's like, this is kind of finished now, but it doesn't quite feel right. And then I just deleted everything except the vocals and started over again. Like Wild Eyes was a song like that, where it was like, yeah, okay, this is good, but it's not a hit. I could just, and then I redid everything. And I think I don't think, because a good song, like in bottom line, like a good song should be a good song, whether it's just you with a guitar, like singing, or if it's this massive, giant, super expensive production with like a full orchestral score. It should be a good song. So you shouldn't be afraid to challenge that. Like,
I think being willing to, at this state, just delete everything and start from scratch, and just basically in service of the music and of the song and of the potential that's maybe still hidden there.
Try something, and you can always go back if it doesn't turn out well. But I like having this A/B testing kind of thing going on, where it's like, okay, this is A, what would B be like? Because maybe B will be twice as good.
Have you ever gone back, like recreated a song from scratch, and then you went with the original version you had?
No, I don't think so.
But it might still happen at some point.
But I have had a situation where I didn't go with any of them, but turned to C, where it was actually like, okay, A, okay, that's not quite right. B, okay, that's still not quite right. And then in the end, it turned out like, okay, this is the one. Like, I actually did it 3 times. It's happened. That's actually happened a couple of times.
Well, I have one last question for you, and if there are more questions in the chat that we can't get to, then I'll send them to you later, or you might come back to the video later, Anders, and have a look at those. But for now, my last question is, if you would meet someone who's never heard of Ashbury Heights, and you would get them to listen to one song, which song would you pick? Which song do you think represents you as an artist the most?
Oh, that's really hard now. like it was that would have been like pre-pandemic, that would have been really easy, and now like with the work we've been doing with singles and like collabs over the last few years, that's harder.
So let's have 2 answers. What would be your answer? Would have been your answer before the pandemic? Which song would you have picked then?
Before the pandemic, I would have probably picked "If You're Shooting with Your Left, It Means the Right Side is Working," because it's a song that I'm incredibly proud of, both lyric wise and like production wise. But now, like, I think we've been doing so much good work lately, and it's been so inspiring to work with you and to work with other like great artists. I'm very fond of the song that we did with Danny Blue, Cutscenes.
Yeah.
I think we broke new ground there. We did something that I've never done before. We went like full 80s industrial, and it was really, really fun. Mm-hmm. And I'm also a huge fan of the one we did last, Cut into Place, which is one of the hardest songs I've ever had to write, but it turned out really good in the end.
Yeah.
And I think if someone asked me today, like, what do you do? Like, oh, you do music. What do you do? How does it sound? I would have probably showed them. Cut into Place now, because that's where I am now. That's what feels like right in this moment. And then, like, if they like that, they can check out the rest.
That's very interesting, and I gotta say I love those lyrics as well. Like, for me, the music is a very easy sell for me, because I can connect immediately. But then looking into the lyrics and kind of drowning in them in a way, and being able to just go into that space, and you make that so easy. So thank you for creating all of these amazing songs, and hopefully there'll be more. You said there's going to be something coming out soon, so we'll all be looking forward to that. And thank you so much for being part of this interview. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I think we could go on for another hour, but I'll let you go for this time. Thank you so much, and thank you to all of you out there who have been listening. And any more questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. And
thank you. This was fun.
Bye.
Bye.